If you heard a faint growl beneath the wreckage of a flooded barn, would you run or listen closer? The floodwaters had swallowed most of the valley in northern Arkansas, and the air still hung heavy with the scent of wet wood and animal waste. Among the scattered debris, a young boy named Eli walked barefoot, his face blank, his mouth silent, as it had been for 8 months. No one expected him to speak. Not since that night. Not since the car crash that took his father's life and left Eli staring out windows, mute to the world. His mother, Caroline, tried everything. Therapy, art, even moving to this rural town. Nothing brought his voice back. Eli spent most of his days near the edge of the woods, away from the grown-ups and their careful eyes. He wasn't like other kids anymore. Something inside him had shut off, like a radio unplugged mid-song. The other children were kind, but he didn't respond. They stopped trying. He preferred the quiet, or maybe he didn't prefer anything at all. He walked the same loop every day along the gravel road, over the hill, past the remnants of what used to be Lyle Jennings' old farm. That morning, the air smelled different, earthier, damp. He noticed broken boards, tire marks, and the outline of something large half-submerged in a pool of runoff. It looked like a deer at first. Something with fur, but bigger, muscular, breathing. Eli crouched without fear, moving slowly toward the shape. It made a sound. Not a roar, not a whimper. Something in between. A warning, maybe. Or a cry. Her fur was soaked and streaked with mud, her golden eyes dulled by exhaustion. She was a lioness. An actual lioness. Eli blinked once and stood still as if time had paused with him. She didn't charge. She didn't move. She just watched him, chest rising and falling in jagged rhythm. He didn't scream. He didn't run. The flood had swept through 3 small traveling zoos, and one of them hadn't properly evacuated. Most of the animals were found or reported. This one wasn't. Maybe she'd escaped into the trees and wandered toward the remnants of the barn. Maybe she was looking for something too. Either way, she had no name, no collar, no handler nearby. Just her and Eli. The boy reached into his pocket and pulled out half of a peanut butter sandwich, offering it without hesitation. The lioness didn't move. But she didn't growl again. She blinked, slow and deliberate, as if memorizing the boy's face. Caroline had been calling for him for over an hour. When she finally saw him, standing next to a 300-pound predator like it was a stray dog, her scream echoed across the field. She ran, arms flailing, stumbling in the mud, expecting to find him torn apart. But Eli didn't flinch. He didn't even turn to her. He just stayed there, silent, watching the lioness. The animal didn't growl, didn't lunge. She lowered her head slowly and closed her eyes. It was the first moment of peace either of them had felt in weeks. Caroline froze, her mouth open, unsure whether to call for help or trust what she was seeing. Later, neighbors would say they'd seen wild things before. Bobcats, coyotes, even a bear once, but never a lion. It made no sense. But the world had stopped making sense a long time ago for Caroline. Since the accident, her son had become a stranger in their own home, unable or unwilling to connect. This moment, as terrifying as it looked, felt different. Eli hadn't let anyone touch him in months, and now he was brushing mud off the lioness's fur, slow and gentle. He knew exactly what she needed. Something passed between them, silent and invisible. Caroline didn't call animal control that day. She called her brother, Dan, a former vet tech who still had friends in wildlife rescue. "Don't freak out," she said into the phone. "But there's a lion in the barn. And I think he found her." Dan thought it was a joke, until he heard the tone in her voice. When he arrived, flashlight in hand, he found his nephew sitting in the dirt, legs crossed. Lioness curled beside him like a house cat. "Don't move," he whispered. But Eli didn't move, didn't even blink. The lioness raised her head and looked directly at Dan, not with threat, but with weariness. The vet team arrived at dusk, cautiously approaching with tranquilizers and nets. But nothing happened the way they expected. The lioness didn't fight. She didn't resist. She just looked at Eli and let out one long, low sound, almost like a sigh, and lay her head on his lap. When they finally took her, Eli stood up slowly. Caroline thought he might cry or scream or collapse, but he didn't. He just looked at them, then back at the trees, still silent, still watching. No one knew what to say, but everyone felt it. Something had shifted. That night, Eli refused dinner. He sat on the porch, arms wrapped around his knees, staring into the woods. Caroline sat beside him, unsure what to say. "They're taking good care of her," she whispered. "She'll be okay." He didn't nod, didn't shake his head, just sat. But when she started to get up, she heard it. So faint, so quiet she almost thought she imagined it. One word, one small word, hoarse and cracked, but real. "Stay." She looked down. Eli was staring ahead, still motionless. But he'd spoken. After 8 months of silence, he'd spoken. And deep in a wildlife transport truck, under the soft hum of engines and the scent of antiseptic, the lioness lay still. Her eyes blinked once, then closed, as if sensing the boy from miles away, as if part of her had stayed behind with him. The next morning, the house was quiet, but different. Caroline heard movement before sunrise, soft steps on the stairs, the creak of the fridge opening, a chair scraping back. Eli was up, awake, present. She didn't want to scare the moment away, so she just watched him from the hallway. He was drawing something on the kitchen table. Circles, a tail, large paws, a maneless face. It was her, the lioness. He pressed the pencil with care, no longer in that empty trance that had haunted him for so long. There was focus now, intention, and grief, a different kind. Dan called that afternoon with news. They've identified her. She came from a roadside zoo down in Oklahoma. The place lost power in the storm. Most of the animals drowned or were sedated too late. She must have gotten free. Caroline closed her eyes. They're not putting her down, right? Dan hesitated. No, but they're not keeping her here either. She's headed to a sanctuary in Colorado. They'll take good care of her. But it's far, and there are procedures. Quarantine, health checks, behavioral assessments. Eli, sitting nearby, didn't react. He just looked out the window. The next few days were a blur of vet visits and forms. Caroline took Eli to the temporary shelter where the lioness was kept. She was in a large pen with bales of hay and heated lamps, resting beneath a tarp. When she saw Eli, she stood, not aggressively, not fearfully, just alert, present, like she remembered. Eli didn't speak, but he moved to the fence, hand outstretched. She came close, pressing her nose gently against the wire. The volunteers watched in stunned silence. "She won't get that close to anyone else," one said. "Only him." There was no doubt. She knew him. One of the staff members, a tall woman with graying hair named Marla, knelt beside Caroline. "I don't mean to overstep," she said, "but has your son ever had trauma?" Caroline hesitated, then nodded. He stopped speaking after his father died. Nothing helped. Marla looked toward the pen. "Sometimes," she said softly, "animals carry something for us. Sometimes they hold it until we're strong enough to take it back." Caroline looked at her son, hand still against the fence, eyes wide but calm. It was like watching someone come home to themselves, piece by piece. But then came the call. The sanctuary wanted the lioness transported by the end of the week. No exceptions, regulations, safety concerns, liability. Dan argued on the phone for nearly an hour, but the answer stayed the same. Eli sat on the porch that evening, clutching a small toy lion his father had once given him. He didn't speak, didn't cry, just held the toy in his lap, turning it over in his hands. Caroline knelt beside him. "We can visit her," she said gently. "Maybe write letters, send pictures." He didn't respond, but she saw the corners of his mouth tighten. The next morning they went to say goodbye. Eli brought a small blanket with him, the one from his crib, faded and torn but still soft. As they approached the pen, the lioness stood. Eli handed the blanket to Marla. "Can she keep this?" he whispered. The sound shocked everyone. His voice, quiet but strong, had returned. Marla nodded, eyes wet. "Of course," she said. "We'll make sure she always has it." Eli stepped back, hands clenched at his sides, watching as the lioness lay down again, the blanket draped beside her like a promise. As they prepared her transport crate, Eli lingered nearby, refusing to look away. The process was slow and clinical. Sedatives, heart monitors, special restraints. But she didn't fight. She looked at Eli once, long and deep, then closed her eyes. Caroline watched her son in awe. He was standing taller now, not fixed, not healed, but grounded, present. A thread had been reconnected, and she knew in her bones that this animal had done something no doctor, no medication, no therapy ever could. That night, Eli opened his father's old drawer and pulled out a leather-bound notebook. "Can I write to her?" he asked quietly. Caroline, holding back tears, nodded. "Of course." He started writing that very night, slow and careful. "Dear Lion," he began, "I think we both got lost in that storm. But I found you, and you found me." As he wrote, the house felt warmer, brighter, alive again. Caroline knew they would never be the same, and somehow, that was a gift. The next morning he spoke again. Not much, but words, real words. "She's brave," he said at breakfast. "Braver than me." Caroline placed a hand over his. "She's brave because of you," she whispered. "And you're braver than you think." Eli nodded, solemn and still. He wasn't healed, but he had a direction now, a tether. And the lioness, wherever she was, had left something behind. A mirror of survival, of strength in stillness, of hope hidden in the unlikeliest of places. The sanctuary in Colorado kept their word, sending updates on Amira once a week. Each email came with photos and detailed notes about her recovery. The first showed her lying in a shaded area of her new enclosure, eyes half closed, the blue baby blanket from Eli folded neatly beside her. Caroline printed the photo and placed it on the fridge, but Eli didn't need the reminder. He'd already memorized every line of her face. He stood in front of it for minutes at a time, not speaking, just looking. Something about seeing her safe, alive, was anchoring him. His silence no longer felt like absence. It felt like listening. Days turned into weeks, and the smallest things began to shift. Eli began waking up earlier, no longer needing to be coaxed from bed. He sat at the table each morning with paper and colored pencils, drawing scenes of animals, mostly lions. He wasn't just copying photos. He was imagining a lion beneath stars, a lion with a crown of vines, a lion and a boy walking side by side through a forest. Each image told a story he still couldn't say out loud, but Caroline could feel it. Something was building inside him, a new vocabulary made of color and memory. His speech returned in fragments like puzzle pieces slowly being placed. "Amira is strong," he whispered one night. Then, a few days later, "She's not afraid anymore." He'd speak in hushed tones, as if his voice might scare the truth away if he used it too loudly. At school, he still kept to himself, but when asked to write a story, he filled the page with lines about a lion who survived a flood and helped a boy find his way home. The teacher called Caroline in tears. "He's speaking through her," she said. "It's beautiful." In town, word of the lion spread like wildfire. Some thought it was an exaggeration, a grieving boy's fantasy. Until Caroline brought in one of the printed photos. Amira's face, regal and raw, silenced every doubter. Neighbors began to ask how they could help. One woman dropped off art supplies. A local carpenter offered to build Eli a custom drawing desk. Even the feed store owner pledged to donate monthly to Amira's sanctuary. "That lion didn't just survive," he said. "She reached people, through him." Caroline smiled through tears. The kindness was contagious. Eli, meanwhile, began collecting facts about lions, their habitats, the way they form prides. "She was alone too long," he told Caroline one night. "Lions need each other." He started spending time at the local animal shelter, sweeping floors, folding blankets, asking quiet questions about each animal's story. When a limping beagle came in, Eli sat outside its kennel for hours until the dog finally crawled into his lap. "It's like he knows," the shelter director said, watching through the glass. "He sees what we can't." Caroline didn't have to explain. Eli wasn't just healing, he was learning to help others heal too. One morning, Caroline received a call from the sanctuary director herself. "We're organizing a private visit for select families," she said. "And we'd love to have Eli here to see Amira, if he's ready." Caroline held the phone to her chest for a moment before answering. "He's been ready," she said quietly. When she told Eli, he didn't shout or jump or even smile. He just nodded solemnly, then disappeared into his room. A few minutes later, he returned with the original blanket, faded but clean, and his latest drawing, a lion and a boy standing beside a mountain. The drive to Colorado took 2 days, with long stretches of open highway and silence between. But this time, the silence wasn't empty. It was sacred. Eli asked questions about the landscape, the animals they passed, and whether lions liked snow. He drew in his notebook while they rested at motels, sketching the curves of mountain ranges and shapes of leaves he'd never seen before. Caroline could see it in his eyes. He wasn't just going to see a lion. He was going to finish something, to close a circle that had started on that flooded morning when neither of them should have survived. The sanctuary was tucked into the base of a hill, wide and open, filled with gentle sounds. Birds, rustling trees, the low murmur of caretakers who worked with reverence. When they arrived, one of the staff met them at the gate. "She's been calm all morning," he said. "It's like she knows he's coming." As they approached the enclosure, Eli slowed his steps, gripping the blanket with both hands. Caroline could hear his breath, steady but deep. She didn't speak. No one did. On the far side of the fence, Amira stood under a pine tree facing them already. She was bigger now, healthier. Her coat gleamed in the sunlight, and her muscles moved like silk beneath it. But her eyes, those golden, solemn eyes, hadn't changed. She stepped forward, slowly, deliberately. Eli walked to the fence, knelt down, and pressed his hands against it, just like he had back home. Amira came so close. She didn't roar. She didn't flinch. She lowered her head and touched her nose to the fence, right where Eli's hands met the metal. The moment stretched, holding its breath. Then she let out a low, soft sound, not a growl, but something deeper, a purr. The staff around them stood frozen. "She's never done that," one whispered. Eli looked up at Caroline, then turned back to Amira. "Hi," he said softly. Just one word, but full of meaning. He knelt there for a long time, not speaking again, just watching her, hand on the wire as she settled down beside it. They stayed like that, boy and lioness, two survivors of different storms, breathing in sync beneath a Colorado sky. Caroline took a photo not to share but to keep, a frozen memory of a moment that proved something sacred. Love doesn't need words to be real. Connection doesn't need reason. Back in Arkansas, life didn't return to the way it was. It became something new. Eli no longer drifted through the days in silence. He spoke now, not all the time, but when it mattered. He asked questions. He told stories. He helped Caroline in the garden, feeding birds, watching squirrels, naming them like they were characters in some quiet novel. His world was expanding again, but it wasn't just his world. It was his heart. He hadn't forgotten the accident. He hadn't forgotten his father. But the pain had a companion now. It wasn't just grief. It was growth. Mira remained a part of their lives in ways both loud and invisible. The sanctuary sent updates monthly, and each one felt like a heartbeat through the mail. Eli made a habit of drawing something for her with every letter, sometimes just a paw print, other times whole scenes. He began referring to her as his lion sister, and no one corrected him. He wasn't being cute, he was being honest. To him, she was family. She had seen him when no one else could. She hadn't asked for him to speak. She had only asked him to be. One afternoon, Caroline found him packing a small box. Inside were folded drawings, an old shoelace from his favorite sneakers, a smooth stone he'd found on the road, and a handwritten note. For when you miss the flood, but don't want to remember it. He didn't explain it, and she didn't ask. That night, she carefully mailed the package to the sanctuary. A few weeks later, they sent back a photo of Amira sniffing the stone, the box open beside her. It sat beside her blanket now, like a shrine of resilience, a boy's care, a lioness's trust. The local elementary school invited Eli to speak during Animal Kindness Week. At first, he said no, but a week later, he changed his mind. "I want to show them her picture," he told Caroline, "and maybe tell them she didn't hurt me." On the day of the event, Eli stood in front of 60 children, hands shaking but voice steady. He didn't say much, just enough. He held up the photo of Amira, told them how she had been left behind, how she had waited for someone, and somehow, that someone had been him. The room was silent when he finished. Later, a small girl from the first row ran up to him and pressed something into his hand. A torn paper with a crayon drawing of a tiger and a boy holding hands. "My brother doesn't talk either," she whispered, "but I think he will someday." Eli didn't say anything. He just smiled and nodded. When Caroline saw the paper later, she wept. Eli taped it next to his drawings of Amira, like a puzzle piece he hadn't known he was missing. The story wasn't just theirs anymore. It was a seed, and it had started to grow roots in others. With Dan's help, Caroline and Eli started a small nonprofit, Voices of the Wild. It focused on rescuing abandoned animals, creating educational material for trauma-impacted children, and partnering with sanctuaries across the country. The first campaign featured Eli's artwork and Amira's story. The response was overwhelming. Donations poured in. Letters arrived from parents, veterans, social workers, even zookeepers. All said the same thing in different ways. This story gave us hope. This story reminded us that healing takes time. And sometimes it takes fur and claws. Eli never forgot the moment Amira touched her nose to the fence. It lived inside him like a quiet bell. Every time he felt lost, he'd sit on the porch, close his eyes, and imagine her breathing beside him. He didn't need to see her to feel her anymore. She had become part of him, like the scar he carried deep in his heart. Not a wound, but a reminder. She had taught him that pain could be survived, and more than that, it could become the beginning of something beautiful, something lasting, something loud. Even if spoken in whispers, Caroline began to change too. Watching her son come back from the edge reshaped how she saw the world. She left her job at the real estate office and took a part-time role at the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. "I want to help the ones that get overlooked," she said. "The ones who don't roar but still matter." People in town stopped her on the street now, not to offer pity, but to say thank you, to ask about the lion, to say they'd started leaving food out for strays or checking on the abandoned barn near the woods. Compassion, it seemed, was contagious. One morning, a brown envelope arrived with no return address. Inside was a single photo: Amira lying in the snow, Eli's blanket beneath her, her eyes facing the camera. On the back, someone had written in clean, neat print, "She is well. She remembers." Eli placed the photo on his bedside table, next to the stone she once sniffed. He didn't cry. He just whispered, "Good." And that was enough. Some stories didn't need an ending, just a continuation, like breath after breath, step after step. He understood that now. So did she. Eli didn't just survive that flood. He didn't just find a lion in the wreckage. He found his voice in the silence between growls, his strength in the stillness of golden eyes. And Amira didn't just escape a broken zoo. She crossed paths with a broken boy and stood beside him until the world grew quiet enough for him to speak. In saving her, Eli didn't become a hero. He became whole. He didn't just save a lion, he remembered how to live. And sometimes that's the braver thing.